Hello and welcome to my channel. Today's video is going to be how to create this toy brick. We won't be covering the animation part. That's just to make it a little more interesting. So let's start by turning that off because it gets annoying real fast. So the brick we'll be making is this one, and I'll show you how to put a different letter on each peg, which is something I think is sort of hasn't been out there. It's a little unique. I'll also show you how to do the legs underneath. We won't cover how to put the little divots on each wall. I don't think that's really part of beginner, or it's redundant for a beginner. So let's get started. So to get started, I'm going to create a new document, and that'll leave the old one open, but let us work on the new one so we can use the old one for good reference. So I want to start out by showing you the drawing that we're going to be using as a reference, and you can get that at Teachers Pay Teachers, and I'll leave the link in the description of this video. Let's take a quick look at that drawing so we can see what we're dealing with. So if you have the drawing, if you know, that will help you to understand what's happening, but you can get through the video without it. So the first thing we'll be implementing is the large block with these two dimensions here. So let's go do that. And actually what we'll do is we'll create each of the 5 pieces necessary to create the brick. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's get started. First I'm going to increase my font size a little bit so it's easier to see. And we need 5 objects to make our brick. We're going to need two cubes. So I like to just put these in advance so I know what I'm working with. And I'll need 3 cylinders. So let's just put in a cylinder and we'll copy it twice. So I did Control C and Control V to copy that. So this isn't going to look like much because everything's overlapped, and they're also we only have 5 sides to each cylinder. So let's make it look a little prettier so it's easier to work with. I like to be able to see, I like it to look a little bit like what it's going to be. So now you see the cylinder looks more like a cylinder, and we can, when we render the final version, we can make that even more more faces to make it smoother. So the next thing we want to do is start giving things dimensions, because right now they're all at a single unit dimension. So if you go to your drawing, you'll see the dimensions for the first cube are 3180, 1580, and 9.6, and those go in brackets, square brackets, and they are the unit numbers separated by a comma, and you'll have 3 of them for the X, Y, and the Z. So if I hit F5, that will now render our main brick. Now let's do the second brick, which subtracts from the main brick. The second brick dimensions are 2890, and you can see this on your drawing, is 1290 and 860, and that gives it a 1 unit wall inside of it. Now when I render this, you'll notice that nothing changes, and that's because this cube is smaller than the one that is contained than the one above it. So we're going to want to subtract this cube from this cube. Cube's not the best name, is it? Because that's not a cube. So let's do that subtraction now. So to do the subtraction, we use the difference command, followed by parentheses, and then a curly bracket, and whatever we want to difference inside the curly bracket. So we put the second one after it, and then we have the 2 cubes. So what the difference command does is it takes the first cube and subtracts the second one from it. It will also subtract anything below this first cube in front of this curly. So you can subtract multiple things from the initial object. So let's render that and see what happens. So you see that it's out of position, and OpenSCAD kind of shows you the second one because they overlap. But if we render it, you'll see it cleans it up. But you'll notice that it's offset wrong, so we need to move the second cube into the center. So let's do that next. To reposition the second cube, we need to use the translate command. So we can put a translate command in front of the cube, and it'll need the 2 square brackets to contain our numbers. Basically, a vector is what it's called in this case. So 1.45 and 1.45 is how thick the wall is. And now when we render that, you'll see the cube has moved to be in the center of the main brick. And that's all we need to do for the main body. So now let's begin to resize our, the first one's going to be our pegs, and the second 2 are going to make our legs. So let's start with the pegs. So to set the peg cylinder dimensions, first we're going to enter the height. And you can type it in as h equals, and then it's going to be 1.8. We'll do a comma, and then we'll type in the radius. So you want to type that in as r equals, and then the radius is 2.42. Now there are other ways to put this in, but we're going to go with this convention for easier understanding right now. And you'll see that our peg has changed in shape and size. So the next thing we want to do is move this up into position. So we'll do that with the translate command. So in this case, I'm just going to copy this translate and then put it down here. I want to make these 0, and then I'll add a z value. So the z value is going to be the height of the brick, so that's 9.6, and that should put our peg right on the top. So later on we'll reposition this peg. So now let's move, set the size of these cylinders. So these cylinders are going to be very similar, so I'm just going to copy the center part here. So I can right click and get copy and then paste it here, and then I'll paste this one here. So the height of these are going to be the same as the inside of the brick, which is going to be 8.6, and they can both be the same. They can both be 8.6. And then the radius is going to be, there's going to be an outer radius, and that's 3.25, and an inner radius, which is going to be 2.40. Now, these are dimensions that I measured on my own, so they could be wrong. So before we render this, we'll remember right away that just having them there creates one cylinder that you can't see, and we need to difference the two of them. So let's just copy the difference command from up here and paste it down here. I'm going to highlight, or I'm going to tab these both over, and I'll put an end curly, and that's so it's very readable. And that'll difference our two cylinders. So you see they were resized and differences, and you can see by the green sort of thing that they're overlapping each other on the ends, but they're different. And let's do just a quick render so you can kind of see the actual result. So you can see that it's now hollow. So now let's start duplicating these pegs and legs and repositioning them. So to duplicate our pegs, we'll start with the X direction. So we're going to make 4 pegs in this direction. And we'll do that with a for loop. So we'll type in the command for, and then the body of the for loop is the variable I equals to, in square brackets, 0, colon, and 3. So that's the range we're going to count. So every time we go through this for loop, I is going to first be set to 0, and then the second time through it'll be set to 1, the third time 2, and then 3. And so we end this with a curly bracket, and then whatever we want to loop through with the ending curly bracket. So right now, as it stands, we'll just have 4 cylinders that are sitting on top of each other. So we need to use the I variable in the X translate so that it moves each time we go through this for loop. We don't want it to move just 1 unit each time. So the first time through would be 1 unit, then 2 units, then 3 units, or 0 units, 1 unit, 2 units, and 3 units. We want it to be moved by the space in between, so that's 8 units, in our case millimeters. So now when we run this, we'll see our 4 pegs. And later on, we're going to position all of the pegs at once to be on the brick. So the next for loop we want to do is to create a second row of pegs. So let's do that now. So the second for loop will be very similar, but have a few changes. So I just highlighted this whole block and hit tab to move it all over. I'm going to copy the for loop here. So you want to minimize your typing. I'm going to put J there, and I'm going to put 1 there. So this is going to create two rows of pegs. So 0 is the first row, and 1 is the second row. We're going to add a second ending curly bracket to match this for loop. So basically, we're going to do this whole for loop twice. So we need to add a translate for this as well. And in this case, it's going to be J times 8. So for the first time through this whole thing, the 4 times through this inner loop goes, J is 0. The second time through the inner loop, J is 1. So it'll effectively create a second row up there. So let's preview that, and we'll see our pegs. That's great. So the last thing we need to do with the pegs is move them into position. So to move the pegs into position, I'm going to copy this translate. We'll put that down here, and we only need to translate the center of this to here, which from our drawing is 3.9 millimeters or 3.9 units, because OpenSCAD is agnostic to units. So that, I think that might need to be in curlies, but nope, it doesn't even need to be in curlies. So, so that's the thing with these modifier commands, is they affect the next object. This is considered the next object. So now we'll get started on the legs. So to duplicate the difference command, we'll copy this for loop right here, but we'll make it a K instead of an I, and it only has to go to 2 because we only need 3 pegs. So 0 is the first peg, 1 is the second, and 2 is the third. We also need to add a second curly, and let's select this whole bit of code and tab it over. And then we need to add a translate for the for command to operate on. So it's going to be translate. I guess I could have just copied one from above, but so it's going to be K times 8 this time, and then the Y will be 0 in this. Actually, we could just translate them in the Y direction right in this. So we use one translate. Or nope, I'm not going to do that because I want the positioning of the first peg to be in its own translate. So let's render this, and we'll see that we now have our 3 pegs. So now we need to move all 3 of these into position. So I'm going to put a translate in front of this for block. I'll learn my lesson this time and just copy this one. And the values for that translate, if you go to our drawing, is the center of the first leg. So the center of this leg is at 7.9 on the X and 7.9 on the Y. And then when we preview that, they seem to disappear, but they're not. They're underneath. So that's our full brick. Now if I render this, we'll see a bit of a nicer version of that. So after we're done with this, we will do the text next. So here's our rendered version. So you can see we've got our full brick. And if we wanted to remove these pegs, facets a little bit, we could increase the face numbers, the number of faces. So now let's add our text. To add text to our toy brick, we're going to add a command right below the cylinder, and that's going to be the text command. The text command receives as its first argument a string of text that's quoted, and that's the text that will appear on the top. Then the width of each character, and then we're going to put in alignment values. So the horizontal align, H align, is going to be centered, and then we're going to do a vertical align. And I'll do that just by selecting this text, copying it, and we'll change the H to a V. We end this command with a parenthesis and a semicolon, and that will add text to our brick. But right now, it'll just sit at the bottom. Let's render it and you can see that. So you see we've got text at the bottom. So why isn't it translated? Let's figure that out. To fix that, we're going to add a translate command that's just going to apply to the text. So I'm going to do a translate, and I could have copied one as well, a 0, 0, and we're going to move it up by 1.8, which you can see from right above is the height of our cylinder. So now when we render this, our text should be on top of the pegs. So you see the text is on top of the pegs, but it's a little too tall, but we didn't even give any height. That's because the text command is a 2D command, and actually right now it doesn't have any height. OpenSCAD adds pretend height for it so it's easier to work with. So to add height to a 2D object, we're going to do a linear extrude. So this is extrudes in the Z direction of a 2D object. So we're going to do a 0.4, and we don't need a semicolon because this translate is going to operate on this, and this is going to operate on that. So this is all one block. So we'll render that. So you see it got a little bit smaller because now its height is only 0.4. Instead of 1, which was centered vertically. So that's our brick with text. The one last thing we could do is we could change this to a variable by saying, we'll just say text1, or let's say peg text. And then let's move this peg text up to the top. Oh, I already have it up there. And we'll say peg text cube. So now when we render it, it'll change this to the word cube. And you'll notice it stays centered, and that's because of our H align and our V align. To add text to one letter to the top of each cube, we're going to use an array, and we'll add that array as the variable here, and it'll access the elements of the array using the values in the for loop. So let's create the array first. And so it'll be just peg text, and that's going to equal, so the array is going to be in square brackets, and then it'll just be each letter. So let me just copy the word. Let's see, where's, oh, we'll use brick. I'm just going to type it in first, then we'll add all the different punctuation. So each letter has to be its own string of characters. I guess there might be another way to do this, but this works and is fairly obvious. And then you end that with a semicolon. So that's a single row array or tuple array, or I'm not sure what you want to call it, but it's got 5 elements. So that works out well, except let's do it as cube. So that way it'll fit, because brick is too many letters. So we'll do cube here. And then what we'll simply do is we'll take so let's call this 1. And we'll take this variable, put it down here, and then we have to access the elements of the array, and that'll be coinciding with I. So that should compile and put the letters C, U, B, E, and then C, U, B, E again on there. So let's give that a try. In order to create a second line of text, we're going to need an array with 2 elements, and each of those elements is going to contain an array. So we'll create the array variable page text 2, or peg text, I'm sorry, and put a comma there. So we have 2 elements, and those 2 elements are part of the larger array. So we have an array with 2 arrays in it. So let's change these values. So it needs to be, we're going to do SCAD here, and the reason we're doing that is because we're using our already existing for loop to index this. We need to start with the 0 element. So this is the 0 element in the array, and this is the 1 element in the array, which goes 0 and 1. So for our page text, we need to change this to variable 2, and then to access the array, we're actually accessing the 0 and 1 element, and then each letter one at a time. So let's render this, and you should see OpenSCAD. So thanks for watching, and if you like my videos, make sure you subscribe and click the alarm bell so that you're notified of future videos and updates. The code for this will be on my GitHub page, and the link will be in the description. So have a great day.